everyone can clearly hear our presenter today and hopefully avoid any technical difficulties. I will be muting everybody, but if you would go ahead and mute yourself by pressing *# or the mute feature on your phone, I'd greatly appreciate it. And then once we get started, I'll go back through and double check on everyone. Please share your questions and comments in the Q&A pod, which you'll find in the lower left-hand corner in our presentation window. Once the presentation is complete or as Gail goes along here, she'll answer your questions and comments as we go. Hello, welcome. We're just getting started. Again, I'll make sure to share the recording afterwards along with the transcript and the presentation materials. But Gail's presentation will also be available there in our last window in the lower left-hand corner in the file pod. So you can download that directly from that pod today if you so choose. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our lovely and wonderful presenter today, Gail Fanjoy. Gail is the Executive Director of KFI, where she has worked in a variety of positions for over 38 years. She is a member of the National Board for TASH New England, New England TASH Co-President, and President of Maine APSE, and a member of Maine's Employment First Coalition, representing a customized employment service provider. She has provided leadership in Maine, New England, and nationally for many years, as KFI has transformed their services one person at a time to provide customized supports that enable people to live lives as included, valued, and respected individuals in the community in Maine. So welcome, Gail, and we're so glad to have you. It's a joy to have you. How about that?
You are not the first person who has ever called me Joy, believe me.
Well,
thank you, Jessica. Thank you,
You're
Jessica.
welcome.
Well, I'm glad that it's a nice
conference.
Look, I'm glad it's a nice warm day for you folks in Iowa. It's barely 50 degrees here in Maine.
Press 1
and the wind
to enter
is,
the conference.
Can people hear me?
And I got that little blip there.
Okay, all right.
I think you're fine. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I didn't know if I had to press something.
No, you're doing great.
So anyway, the wind is howling here. It's barely 50 degrees. I'm wearing my winter coat. I know, it's June. But that's the way it is in Maine sometimes. So thank you all for inviting me to share a little bit about KFI's story, our journey, where we are and kind of how we got there, wrapped up in community mapping and community integrated services, which is the title of this. Everybody asks me right off the bat, let's just take care of this, what does KFI stand for? So let me tell you that it stands for Katahdin Friends Incorporated. Now, Katahdin is the name of Maine's highest mountain. It's in my backyard here. It's a mile-high mountain, and it is arguably the first place that the sun hits in the continental United States. So it's a beautiful mountain, and if you came to my hometown, you would see that everything is named Katahdin. So there's the Katahdin Taxi and Katahdin Furniture and Katahdin everything and this and that, including our agency. So let's just get started because I do have a lot of material. I'm going to try and race through it so we can either more informally chat at the end or I can answer your questions, whatever. So here we are. Here's who we are. We provide customized supports for people to live in their own homes. We don't own anyone's home. We don't hold the lease on anybody's home. Everyone is either rents from a typical landlord in the community or they are a homeowner. We provide supports for people to work in regular community businesses or that's individualized competitive community jobs or self-employment. And as you can see there, the picture of Corey, and Corey owns a recycling business. He's employed, self-employed. And we also provide supports for people to be members and contributors to their communities. So we help connect people to just generic community resources and engage in relationships with typical community members. But it hasn't always looked this way. So KFI was established in 1961, and we spent the first quite a few years building buildings and programs and services that really kept people apart from their communities, gathered them together, segregated them, congregated them. And so we had a special purpose school for kids who were aged 5 through 20. At the time the agency was started, they weren't welcomed in public schools before Public Law 94 and 142, now IDEA. We had a segregated preschool program. We had a segregated day program, a standalone sheltered workshop that was a furniture refinishing business. We had a thrift store. We had a 4-bed group home. People typically lived in foster homes, or they lived with family members. Everyone was transported to one location in a little tiny town called East Millinocket in Maine. We owned all of our vans and hired drivers to operate them. All of our services were in KFI-owned buildings, and we only supported people in groups. But today, those kids that were in that special purpose school, of course, are in public schools now. Again, we provide supports for people to have real jobs and businesses for commensurate wages. We provide support for folks to engage in community life, to live in their own apartments or homes, or own their own homes. Services are in the individual's community. So instead of trucking them to this one location where we had a building, we go to where people live and help them become members and contributors to their own community. Folks use public transportation, and in Maine and probably in Iowa too, that's kind of a joke, that might be a taxi in a small town. Although we do provide supports in Portland, Maine, which is Maine's largest city, where there is real public transportation, but most of the time people get around in our staff vehicles. All of our services are customized around what an individual needs and wants. Nothing is provided within space owned by KFI, and once again, we really support individuals in the ways that are meaningful to them. So Peter Drucker was a management writer, a management guru, and I use a lot of Peter Drucker quotes, but this one I think is really important in terms of what we're facing, what many providers are facing across the nation with the new settings rule in particular. And Peter Drucker talked about not just adding, something that is better to our continuum of services, if you will, but actually stop doing stuff. So we talked about this notion of abandonment, systematic abandonment of the old, that no longer fits the purpose and mission of the business, and no longer conveys satisfaction to the customer, and no longer makes a superior contribution. We really took those words to heart, and so instead of just adding supported employment to this continuum where we had these, kind of pre-vocational day program services, and then the sheltered workshop, and then community employment, we actually shut down those other services in favor of all community options. And so in 1985, we shut down our segregated school. In 1987, we shut down our shelter workshop. In 1989, we stopped doing all sheltered work in our day program. And in 1996, we closed the day program facility, and thereby ending all center-based services. So it's been about 25 years, going on 30 years, that we have sustained these community services, and that's through all kinds of different administrations, both on the national level and on the state level. So, how are we structured? What do we look like? It's very, very difficult to put into words. We host providers from other states to come and spend some time with us. We just had a provider from Maryland come, and 2 people from a provider agency in Maryland, and what we do is we embed them in our services for a couple of days so that they get to actually see and feel and meet and talk and to our staff and the folks that we support and our managers, and it's really quite eye-opening and educational. So what they see when they come to KFI, there's nothing to come to, but when they are embedded in our services, they see that we have these staff teams of direct support professionals, and they provide a host of supports. So we have no residential staff versus day program staff versus employment staff. So all of these people, direct support staff that we hire, can be doing one or more of those things during the daytime on behalf of one or more individuals. I think we had, the last count, we had about 80, 85 direct support staff in our agency, and 55 of them are certified in some kind of way that allows them to provide supports to people who work or are seeking work. So they can be, they're either career planners, they're job coaches, or they're employment specialists where they actually interact with employers on behalf of folks. So we believe in really embedding employment services into all of the other services that we provide a person in kind of a whole life kind of way. So our staff duties really tend to be assigned around their interests and connections and talents. And so, you know, if somebody, for example, Maynard is a direct support staff person, and he lives in my community, and he supports Corey with his recycling business, but he also has a real knack for small engine repair, and he supports Mike in his small engine repair business, and he supports Robert when Robert is doing some landscaping in a landscaping business. And so kind of a jack of all trades, but it's really important that we match out people who have a need and an interest and a connection around what the people we support need to. Again, DSPs, our direct support professionals, are certified as job coaches and employment specialists, and they really play an amazing role with the people who are employed, but also they play a big role with people who, in terms of our supports to people, is a person's schedule of supports is designed around real life needs. It's not based upon time of day. The whole day and evening and Sunday through Saturday is at their disposal, and so it depends on, you know, how many hours they're authorized to receive services, and then what do they want, what do they need, and when should that be delivered, when should people be supported to do that. And that is a very dynamic, changeable schedule of supports. Supports are very flexible. They wrap around people's jobs, and if somebody loses a job, then perhaps their other supports are going to change in some way. If somebody gets a job, then their supports to live in their own home or their supports to go about the community change as they become not available for those supports because they're working, or their supports change, their needs change because they're working. Again, the services are based on identified needs and desires, and these are identified primarily during the person-centered planning meeting, but it's ongoing throughout the year. So it's not like you get one day to say what it is you think you're going to want or need for the rest of the year. We would find that to be a very difficult task ourselves. So it's an ongoing discussion and negotiation with the people that are supporting them. We also have supports that are shared by a couple of people at the same time. So it's not totally one-on-one services, but the shared supports are based upon interests that the two individuals have or an activity that they may be involved in. We do have funding that is in a 3-to-1 ratio. In the state of Maine, we think that supporting 3 people at once is not a good thing, and so we would never pair more than 2 people together. And we have an emphasis on employment first. We discovered along the way that people's lives, no matter our best intention, were going to stagnate and resemble other people's lives unless we did something about how we plan with people and how we engage people in planning and thinking about their lives. And so we changed our planning process, and then the state of Maine, in its infinite wisdom, made that much tougher to do, but we still do a fair bit of this by concentrating on people's gifts and their interests and capacities. It's not deficit-based at all. And we don't have people, for example, choose from a menu of programs and activities that the agency provides. So the world is their oyster. We try to make their world bigger by helping them think about where they can connect, who they can connect with, and what their lives could look like with the right type and amount of supports. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail here. So we really caused ourselves first to have to think differently. And we asked ourselves these questions. If a person had the right kind and amount of supports, would he or she need to go to a day program or work in a shelter workshop or live in a group home? And the answer to those questions are no. And so it becomes incumbent upon us then to figure out, how do we build the supports then? How do we build the right kind and amount of supports, both paid and unpaid, that would cause that person to live a life that is unique to them, and one that provides value both to them as well as to the community. So we begin by really thinking about and listing and brainstorming with folks what we would call a personal asset inventory. So it's the skills and personal qualities of the person and their interests and preferences, what's important to them, what works, what should be present in their lives, or what doesn't work, what should be avoided. And we really try and make a real exhaustive list before we begin the actual planning process. We look at what the community, what does the community look like that this person is living in? And we start trying to figure out what are the assets of the community. And it's not just about where. I think that a lot of people spend their community life, if you will, as a customer. They're in the role of customer, that they're really not really engaged in the community in a way where people will get to know them. And so we really think that we need to answer the question, not just where is it that you will go, but who will you meet there? What will you have in common with people there? What is the point of going to into a community location if you're not going to be interacting with people? And so we really take a look at what's in a person's neighborhood if they're living in a bigger city, or what's in a person's community if they're living in a small town, or where is the nearest service center community where people perhaps in a really rural area travel, to some places where there are more resources available, but that's the standard for everybody who lives in that community. So we would take a look at where would that person might go, and where are people assembled in the community that could be helpful. So we talk about these strategies for these community mapping strategies. Actually, I'm going to skip to this next slide. It's kind of a duplicate slide. I was engaged in an asset-based community development exercise. It took place over a couple of days. It was our entire community was involved, and one of the things that we were doing, why we did this, is because we were a one-horse town. We had a world-class paper mill that went bankrupt. And that was not only our largest employer, but just about our only employer in my community. And we lost about half of our population. And so one of the things that happens when a community loses a lot of people and it loses a lot of services, it creates a lot of gaps. But there are silver linings to those gaps. And so, how could somebody fill a role in their community where there's a service missing or a product missing. And so really Corey came about his recycling business as not a direct result of that particular exercise, but a couple of years later, and we used kind of the same ideas around asset-based community development, what's missing in our community, and who has an interest that could fill that. And for Corey, Corey loves to sort, and he would volunteer his time at our recycle center, and he would just be standing there at the door and just taking everybody's recycling in, and just like, I'll do that. He doesn't use a lot of words to communicate, but it was clear that he had this really love for sorting through recyclables. And so, long story short, Corey developed his own around that. He has both residential customers and commercial customers. I'm one of his residential customers. We also have engaged in what we would call community conversations using a World Cafe model. We've only done this internally. We've not done it as an entire community or a segment of the community, but you most certainly could have some really compelling questions that you would want answered as a community or as a neighborhood or even as your agency. We've used the World Cafe model to kind of get unstuck. We felt like we were stagnating in terms of helping people get jobs, and so we used a World Cafe model with some of our managers and our staff to really think a lot deeper about how we were going to get unstuck from where we were. Resource mapping is another thing very similar to the same idea as community mapping. But we do this primarily around individuals when we're planning or when we're doing some thinking about people. And off in the middle you see Melissa. And Melissa loves to bake. And that was one of her interests that came out in her asset inventory and things that we talked about. And so the discussion becomes, well, where is it that Melissa could belong and bake and use her baking? And so this is a picture of Melissa, and she volunteers for the Ronald McDonald House in the city of Bangor and does baking for people who are staying there undergoing serious medical treatments. And then, of course, there's person-centered planning, which is really a mapping strategy, if you will, around an individual in terms of their entire life. This is a picture of Jody, and the closest I could get to Jody, something that she does, she volunteers for a cancer support group. But that's a wonderful picture of Jody stuffing a Thanksgiving turkey. And I'm going to talk about person-centered planning here in a second. So we put it all together, all these kind of balled-up ideas and very vibrant colors, and we use John O'Brien's 5 valued experiences, which are essentially being respected, sharing ordinary places, contributing, choosing, and belonging. And so we ask questions around each one of those 5 valued experiences and brainstorm how someone is going to belong to the community as a result of that. In terms of growing in relationships, we really, have to figure out how we're going to use our resources, quite simply, to help people form and maintain relationships and connections in their community. And we know that relationships and membership increases with the amount of opportunities people have to meet and interact with community members around an area of interest. And this is Dan here pictured on the wearing the blue shirt. I never know if that's the right or the left. It's my right. And Dan lived in a series of foster homes. He was being kicked out of, I think, his 7th foster home in 11 years back in 1989. And Dan was the first person that we supported to move into his own apartment. Dan is now a homeowner, and he's had a variety of work experiences, although he's currently unemployed, but his passion is singing. Dan is a stutterer, and for those of you who know something about stuttering, people don't stutter when they sing, and Dan does not. And so he loves to sing karaoke. He sings at an assisted living facility, attends music jams, and he hangs out with musical friends like his buddy Randy here, who's playing the guitar. I have no clue where they are singing in this picture, but it's part of, it's a huge part of Dan's community is who he's with, who he's singing with, and where he goes. So it's not just where is he going to go, but what is he going to do and who's going to be there. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we consider when we talk about levels of interaction with community members. So there are these kind of 5 levels, the first being no or very little contact with non-disabled peers. And we find that this level kind of typifies people who live in agency-owned housing or grouped with other folks with disabilities, go to segregated day programs or shelter workshops specifically for people with disabilities, that their level of interaction with typical community members tends to be very minimal. And then the next level we talk about is passive contact, and we have lots and lots of passive contact in our lives. It describes people with whom you may greet in passing, or people who wait on you in stores, or who you see on a regular basis but you really don't know. You may recognize their face, or you may not even know their name. Again, we have lots of those people in our lives. The next level, incidental interaction, describes interactions with people who you know and see in certain places, but only in those places. So it's people with whom you exercise at the gym or see in church or at a job or a volunteer job. You know their names, you see them regularly, but only if you happen to both show up at the same time do you see them. The next level being cooperative interactions. In this level of interaction really describes our friends. So they're freely given relationships. They're people, I like to describe it as these are people with whom you make plans. So you may share more than one interest with them, but you're familiar with some of the personal details of their lives, including where they live and their families, they work, and their hobbies. But more importantly, most importantly, these are people with whom you make plans in order to see them. And then we have the last level of interaction called extended relationships, and these are describes the people that you love and who love you. It may also include some very, very close friends or lifelong friends. So really what we try to do when we're doing planning with people and thinking about where in the community is we try to figure out how to move those passive contacts and incidental interactions to cooperative interactions. So where could you go and who could you see that you could actually make a plan with? The next one is on making choices, and so we talk about how can we increase someone's choice and control in their lives, and certainly for folks that we're supporting, it helps them to figure out how they can make more decisions in their lives that affect them directly. So I love this picture. This is a picture of Lenny in the middle, and he's flanked by his friends John and Jim. And Lenny was a diehard Red Sox fan. If you live in New England, chances are you're going to be a Red Sox fan. And every now and then we let Yankees fans across the border here in the state of Maine. But John and Jim were Yankee fans. And when Lenny became friends with John and Jim, they said, "Hey, do you want to go? Do you want to go to a baseball game?" Well, apparently on the way, this is this is Fenway Park in Boston, and the Yankees were playing the Red Sox, which are just like prime tickets if you live in the Northeast. But guess who's a Yankees fan now? So Lenny has gone to the dark side. But certainly his choice, and a choice that I think was influenced by his friendship, certainly with John and Jim. When we talk about contributing, oftentimes this is where we talk about paid work, meaningful volunteer experiences. We talk about how can you contribute, and really when you think about paid work, meaningful paid work, we talk about people who are doing something that they're good at and that they're paid to do. So this is Faye. Now, Faye, in this picture, in the top picture, is holding her first paycheck at age 63. We did some discovery with Faye. She had never worked in her life, came from a very large family of people who didn't think that she could ever work, and was not an expectation for her. But Faye is a Native American and was really interested in connecting with her Native American heritage, and Faye eventually got her dream in her heritage. Faye has gotten done that job. She retired from that job, as she says. She has diabetes, and her diabetes precluded her from standing on her feet and the particular job that she had there. But we make sure that Faye goes to the reservation at least once a week so that she can still visit with her friends. We talk about experiencing respect, and it's really talking about building and maintaining positive, valued social roles. That's really vitally important for people who experience devalued status. So roles such as employee, homeowner, member, volunteer, or more specific roles that describe people's gifts, such as gardener or fundraiser or church member. And this is Charles, a picture of Charles, who was a regular at a coffee shop here in my hometown of Millinocket. And we know that when we introduce people as individuals versus groups of people, when we introduce people as a name, as a person, with particular interests, that and that person spends time in contact with another individual, a group of individuals, then that people begin to see them as somebody who has something to offer. And certainly for Charles, who moved into his own home in 1992 out of his family home, his brother's home actually, with 24 hours a week of supports, and that was it. And so that's what we had to support Charles. And so we had to get very, very busy connecting him to community members who really provided that safety net through church and coffee and exercise and ceramics and sharing meals and shopping and being neighborly. His family refused to allow Charles to work at a job, but Charles was incredibly known in the community and probably taught me the most about how to connect to community and build a really meaningful life than anybody that we've ever supported. And then sharing ordinary places. So you really have to ask, who will you meet there? It's not just a matter of going someplace, but it's a matter of figuring out who will be there and what valued activities will you participate in with the people that are there. So this is a picture of Robert. Robert is sitting in the foreground with a hat on, and Robert is at a place called I Care Ministries, where he does some volunteering. Robert has had a pretty rich work history throughout his lifetime. When he was a young adult and was first referred to our agency, Robert wanted to do some work around cars, and that's kind of what he was set on, was working around cars. And but in the meantime, Robert had moved into his own apartment, and we had about 35 or 40 hours of supports a week for him. And other than the whole, all the things you need to do to help someone get ready for a life, like, cook and clean and pay your bills and mop the kitchen floor and those types of things, we asked Robert what it is that he might be interested in doing in this brand new community he was living in, and he told people that he wanted to go hunting. It's kind of what Maine men do. And we had gotten this really very, very scary list of things about Robert from the special education director of the high school that he had just graduated from or aged out from. And so we said, wow, okay, well, if you want to go hunting, you have to take a hunter safety course, because that's how you get a hunting license in the state of Maine. And so there was one being offered through adult education at our local high school, and so one of his staff helped him to sign up for that course and went in and introduced him to the instructor and kind of looked around the course, looked around the room to see if she knew anybody in that room. Could she connect him to kind of a study person, or maybe a person to give him a ride to the classes, because we had this really small amount of time that we were supporting him, paid to support him, and we really needed some natural supports in his life to help do those other things. And then the staff person faded from that class, and Robert was connected to somebody. Well, in the meantime, our job developer was out looking for a job around cars, and he came to the very last potential place. And he went in, and it was a car dealership. It was actually a satellite car dealership with a one-mechanic shop. And he spoke to the manager, and whatever job developers say. And the manager said, we have this guy that's been detailing cars, and he's out for an extended period of time and maybe forever. Go talk to the mechanic. If it's okay with the mechanic, it's okay with me. And so Bill went in and introduced himself to the mechanic and said, I've got this guy, yada, yada, yada. And the mechanic said, well, who are you talking about? And Bill said, look, he's new in town, it's just, and the mechanic insisted, I want to know who. And Bill said, well, okay, his name is Robert Tyler. And the mechanic said, Robert? I'm his hunter safety instructor. And he got the job. And so we talk about that power of networking while sharing ordinary places. We talk about how building social capital in one area, which when you think it has nothing to do with the job, could have everything to do with the job. And so getting people out there, getting people known, introducing people, and putting them in valued roles is what can actually get people work. So a lot of times I think that what we do when we talk about community is really outings, or what I call disability tourism. So if you went to a foreign country and you signed up, you're in a tour group and you're going to go around and you're just going to see all these places and you're going to tour through them, but you're never really going to penetrate that community. You're probably not going to get to know somebody from that community. No one's going to get to know you, more importantly. And so you really are tourists. And I see folks with disabilities on outings and in what I would call tourism, where they are experiencing a place, but they're really not connected to community, which to me is an entirely different thing. I love this graphic from Think Inclusive. I don't know what Think Inclusive is, but it popped up on Facebook actually one day, and I said, gosh, this is just a really great graphic to talk about how we have thought about community throughout the ages. And so obviously at the top circle are folks with disabilities as the colored dots, intermingled with typical folks as the green dots. We've had a horrible history of exclusion in our culture, where people with disabilities are clearly on the outside and never having much to do with folks without disabilities. And then there's segregation, which I would consider, really a facility-based anything to be, where people are by themselves and not interacting with the community at all. And then the integration circle, I think, is really powerful, because I think this is how we get it wrong. When we think we're really helping people to do things in the community or go into the community, but they're still in their own bubble, whether that's a van or whether that's a group, where they're really in the community but not of the community. And finally, this quote about the size of our world, if you don't know what you're missing, you'll never ask for it, not in a person-centered plan and not in the day-to-day. So you can do something you're good at and earn money, and you can be a contributor to your community by doing something that satisfies you. You can be friends with people who don't have disabilities. You can control your own front door, your own rhythm and routine. This isn't about your disability. It's about your exposure to the art of the possible, what is possible for you. And what we find is that for many folks with disabilities, that they have very, very small worlds. And so when it scares me a little bit when we talk about, well, it's people's choice. People have choice as to where they want to live and what they want to do during the daytime, but unless we're really expanding people's world and expanding people's options, then people will never understand that their life looks very, very different than yours and mine. And so one of the things that we try and do is not just expand the world of the person with a disability, but also to expand the people's typical community members' world by introducing them to folks as people with a particular interest or a particular skill that they might want to spend time to in a location that is accessed by everybody, not just folks with disabilities. And that's it. So yay, we have some time left. So I'm thrilled that usually I go right up into the wire. So be happy to answer questions or chat with anybody.
Thanks, Gail. It looks like we have some folks typing. Go ahead and share any questions, comments, reactions anybody has. Maybe while they're doing that, Gail, I had a question or maybe something you can expand a little bit more on for us. When you were talking about the staff and not being siloed, in the 85 staff, 55 of them being certified or trained in either career planning, employment specialist, job coach, it really sounded like folks were, instead of maybe being specialized in a certain service or the provision of a service, they were really able to specialize in the individual. Would that be?
That's exactly right. So Courtney, again, she's a young woman who is 22 years old. She owns her own home. She owns a vending machine business. She has very significant support needs. She has complex medical and behavioral and intellectual challenges. And we hire Courtney's staff. So we hire staff around Courtney. Now, in order to support Courtney, you've got to, you've got to be able to, do X, Y, and Z in terms of the taking care of part of Courtney. But the biggest part of Courtney is, helping her with her business and supporting her in church and going kayaking with she and her friends, hosting Tuesday night dinners with her friends. So there's a lot to know about Courtney, but it's all of Courtney's staff are certified job coaches. One is a career planner, and one additionally is a job developer. So those were the types of people that Courtney needed, and it's in the job description, and we can teach you how to do all those things, but you kind of have to show up at Courtney's door understanding that Courtney deserves to live a typical life in the community, and you got to figure out, how can I expand, how can I grow her world, how can I expand that world, where is it that Courtney and I can be where her gifts will be appreciated just as she is.
Nice, yeah. And so is there, can there be challenges in hiring folks, or, when you guys were restructuring and stuff, is there any tips or things you learned when it came to building or restructuring those teams around folks? Maybe when services used to be siloed?
I would say that, the most important thing, and yes, we struggle with hiring. I think that everybody does, and the better the economy, the worse time we have finding people to do this kind of work. But we do try to hire people from the community where the person lives, right? So a lot of times I think that what we tried to do, or what we set up for people, and I see this a lot in my work around the country, is that we're going to take a person who lives in a particular community, we're going to truck them to a whole other community for their daytime perhaps, and then we're going to surround them with people not from that community with the goal of inclusion. And that just, you're right? I mean, that doesn't even, make any sense. And so hiring people from the community where the person is to be a citizen is the first thing. The second thing, I think, is we really pay attention to people who are already connected to their community, and they need to be able to talk to us about that. How are you connected to your community, and more importantly, how would you use your connections in the community on behalf of Courtney?
And you kind of touched on this already, you just were, but Amy asked, do you have any specific recruitment strategies for finding staff?
One of the things that we have done, I think, pretty successfully in the past, and it's now a more expensive proposition, but we write job ads from the person's perspective. So it's like a first-person job ad. And so that person explains in the job ad who they're looking for staff.
Nice.
And there are clues in the job ad as to the person's support needs without ever coming out and saying, this is a person with an intellectual disability, or this is a person who doesn't use words to communicate, or this is a person who has some behavioral challenges. So we don't use that language at all in job ads, but you can get clues by reading the job ad that that's the type of a person but it's also, this is a person who may like downhill skiing, or who likes horror movies, or again, they might have a pet, so you need to be able to, you need to like cats, or you need to like dogs, that kind of a thing.
Right. So really almost like those conditions for employment, but it's kind of flipped for.
Right. It's like if you needed support, what would you would really want more of a personality, because someone would teach you, I could teach you, or somebody would teach you how to, if I had a particular regimen that I needed to follow, and that, so that, we have people who are supported that have renal diets and they're diabetic or they're kosher or, whatever. So that all of that can be learned, but people want folks who have, like to laugh, or they have a sense of humor. Maybe they like people who are soft-spoken, or maybe they like people who are really, over-the-top fun. Maybe they like people who will be really careful with their money, those types of things. So it really is unique. And we try to enlist the support, obviously, of the person that's being supported if they can. If not, we turn to their family, their friends, and their allies to say, what do you know about that person that we should be putting in a job ad for somebody?
And if at all possible, are you able to share any of those examples of job ads with us?
I could, actually. Yeah, I have kind of a list of some that I've shared in the past. If, that
would be
I can send them to you, Jessica?
That would be great, yes, and I can send them out to the whole group. So we got another question here from Ms. Glenda Ferrier in Friends. She says, I'll just read it here. It says, Gail, you said you assign staff duties around their interests, connections, and talents. And I think that's when maybe you were talking about the shared support.
Right.
She says, this sounds great, but what concerns have you met while trying to match this up with certain individuals served and adequate funding? She says, our funding is such that one-on-one pre-vocational services is not possible, so we need to look at several people with one staff. Not ideal, but would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. Well, you have to do what you have to do. And that is, I have two thoughts on that. I hope that I can remember the second one as I'm talking.
Yeah, I can repeat it to you when you're ready. Yes.
No, it's just what's in my head. Okay, so here's the thing. When we pair people up, and again, we only pair people in twos, and then I'm going to tell you the exception to that. When we pair people up, it doesn't mean they're paired up for the whole week or the whole day. It means that Charles and Drew go to the Y together with one staff person. They might even have entirely different workouts. Somebody might be swimming, somebody might be playing basketball, somebody might be walking the track. But they're two people supported by one staff person. And then after the Y is done, Charles may go and pair up with somebody else and go to the library, or he may get one-on-one supports, and Drew may go to his job and go get job coach. So in other words, it's a very, very complex schedule of supports that pair people up, have people one-on-one, pair people up, have people one-on-one. I think our supports kind of agency-wide for those people who we support in the community, and we also support people in their own homes in the same manner, is around, I'd say, like 85%, so 0.85 staff to every person supported. So it's close to one-on-one. Some people are more doubled up than others based upon a number of factors I'm sure that you could all imagine. How we do things, how we change that, and how we are allowed, one of the ways we can do that financially is we also have, I think in each area, kind of like large geographic area where we support people, we have a couple of different groups. One is a self-advocacy group, so maybe 6 people come together and are supported by a couple of staff, and they talk about and do things around self-advocacy. We have kind of a job club group that meets, and they're bigger than 2 people. There's a group that meets, I think, in this area where I am, around just health and safety about living and owning your own home. So we do create groups of people, and that helps us on the other end be able to afford more one-on-one staff. I also must say we have a very, very flat infrastructure. So we have no buildings to maintain. Even the building I'm sitting in, our main office, is rented. So we don't own buildings. We don't own vans. We have, I take that back, we own 1 van. And it's assigned to a person who two people who share that van who have a need for accessible transportation that otherwise they wouldn't have any accessible transportation. We have a very flat organizational structure. So most of our dollars go into direct support staff. We don't have an HR department, for example. I was in an agency the other day, and they have a whole incident management department. I'm like, wow, if you have that many incidents, I just think there might be something wrong there. Maybe people need to have better lives, and you'll have fewer incidents, and you can take that money and do something different with it. So most of our resources go into our direct support staff. They're not particularly well paid, I must say, but there are a lot of them, a whole lot of them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gail. Great presentation today with a lot of great information. I want to encourage folks to go ahead and download Gail's presentation. It's in the lower left-hand corner there, but I will be sure to send it out. I'm going to open up the poll questions here for you to respond to. If you haven't already in the beginning of the session, go ahead and share your name and location and your agency. That would be great. And again, we want to thank you, Gail, for joining us today. If folks think of any other questions or comments, please just send them in to me, and I'll be sure to forward them to Gail. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions.
I sure would.
Thank you so much, Gail.
Thank you, Jessica, and I will be sending you some sample job ads.
Perfect, yes, and I'll get that sent out to you guys. And we will be back for our next presentation. Shoot, I wish I brought my calendar, but I believe it's July. No, we're not in July yet. It's June 19th. It's not next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday with Ashley Lance, and she'll be digging deeper into discovery and customized employment for us. I'll be sure to send out a reminder on that and the connection information. Make sure I get that day right for you guys. But thanks so much for joining us, and thank you again, Gail, for a great presentation. And I'll see you guys later on this month.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks, Gail.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.